That was beautiful. In recent days, the usual array of cartoons and jokes have been making their round on social media, which offers some welcome relief from the doom scrolling that prevails on the various platforms where I waste too many hours each week in between telephone calls and emails. One of my colleagues posted a Wendell Simons cartoon from 1987, depicting a wiseacre on the front steps of a church as his wife shakes the pastor's hand, saying, "You're in a rut, Reverend. Every time I come here, every time you preach about the resurrection." It's an old joke at the minister's expense, lampooning both religion and those who show up at church but once or maybe twice a year at the very same moment. After all, most churches do experience a surge in attendance on this Sunday each year, as long-suffering spouses and partners manage to drag reluctant companions to church with them, while others, on their own initiative, come out to see if anything has changed since the last time they came out for a predictable sermon on a weary theme. Now, if you're here for the first time in a while, or perhaps in forever, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable or unwelcome. Well, at least not unwelcome. Relevant worship should sometimes leave people feeling a little uncomfortable, ministers included. None of us grows, spiritually or ethically, if we don't feel uncomfortable from time to time. Discomfort is the growing edge. Anyway, the colleague who reposted this particular cartoon remembered how, when he was still in seminary, he found himself chatting with someone at a social gathering. This would have been in the days before social media, when we still got together over drinks in person. She revealed to him that she had checked out the Unitarian Universalists, but found us to be, quote, too Christian for her tastes. Acknowledging that we do indeed have congregations that are distinctly Christian, my colleague asked her which congregation she had attended, to which she replied that she had attended a Christmas Eve service at a congregation that had a reputation as one of the most humanistic ones on the West Coast. She then added, "Just to be sure, I returned on Easter." My colleague, James Ford, who identifies as a Buddhist himself, was naturally amused at the suggestion. Well, the laugh out loud emoji was well used on his timeline yesterday, and a few people responded with stories and observations of their own. I held back because I had a sermon to finish. Another colleague, Fred Hammond, recalled joining his aunt at a Christmas Eve service when a friend of hers was performing. A musician, I presume, perhaps a pan flutist or a harpist. And as they were leaving, he overheard someone complain that the service at this particular Unitarian church had been, quote, too Christian, prompting him to turn to his aunt and say, too Christian, they didn't even mention Jesus once. As Fred's comment intimates, when those attending Unitarian Universalist congregations describe a service as too Christian, they are often referring to form rather than substance. And if a hypothetical space alien were observing us from afar, as we might watch an army of ants, the insect kind, not Fred's aunt, it would be hard to distinguish our observable behavior from that of the church across the street. But most Sundays, the content couldn't be more different, even if the outward behaviors are the same. I'll confess that at Christmas and Easter, I generally conform to the prevailing Christian culture that surrounds us, albeit with a naturalistic or a humanistic twist. I'm content to let Christmas be Christmas and Easter be Easter, partly because people are more likely to attend services at these two times, suggesting to me that they're willing to suspend disbelief and immerse themselves in the dominant culture, or at least connect with it more closely. That said, we needn't be constrained by the customary narrative of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus as told in the Bible. Indeed, many Unitarian Universalists substitute the spiritual resurrection of nature in the springtime for the more traditional narrative, which works exceptionally well if you live in the Northern Hemisphere, but not so much if you're a religious liberal in Australia or New Zealand, where it may be time to prepare your yard and soul for the coming winter. And then there are those who have been fated to live in places without such distinctive changes in season. What do they do at Easter time? If you're a preacher, it doesn't take long to run out of clever ideas to tell the twin stories of resurrection and springtime in new and convincing ways. The same goes for the solstices and equinoxes, civic holidays and recurring feasts, annual remembrances, and other special days. How much more pleasurable it is for the preacher to deal with anniversaries that only come once in a lifetime, not every year or every season. If you've said it once, the subsequent retellings begin to feel like reruns. There's just so many ways you can retell these stories without sounding like a religious variation of a Hallmark movie. About half a dozen Easters into my career, my sermon themes having ranged from the almost but not quite profound to the tastefully irreverent, if not quite blasphemous, I decided that Easter and Christmas both provide opportunities for free thinkers and other religious liberals to revisit the things they think they know about their Christian neighbors, overcome whatever prejudices or reactivity they may have, explore themes they commonly ignore, and reacquaint themselves with whatever teachings may still be relevant for them. So I like to explore our Christian roots on these occasions, return to the springs, if you will, and celebrate eternal truths that still ring true to me. And so this brings me to the Beatitudes, which you will not hear about in most Christian churches today as they proclaim that he is risen and celebrate the Easter cycle. But the Beatitudes are a memorable recitation of blessings attributed to Jesus in two different versions, one of which appears in the Gospel of Matthew and the other in the Gospel of Luke. In Matthew, they constitute the familiar opening to the Sermon on the Mount, which is arguably religious liberals' favorite part of the Gospels. While in Luke, Jesus doesn't get around to the Beatitudes until after he's addressed the Sabbath, shares a parable, chooses his disciples, and heals the sick. Then come the blessings and the woes, after which he admonishes his followers to love their enemies and refrain from judging others, before moving on to the next parable. Jesus loved to tell stories as a way to illustrate his teachings. In his book, A Man Without a Country, novelist Kurt Vonnegut, a humanist from a German free-thinking family who attended Unitarian churches, reflected on what difference it might make if Christians emphasized the Beatitudes over the 10 Commandments. For some reason, the most vocal Christians among us never mention the Beatitudes, he lamented. But often with tears in their eyes, they demand that the 10 Commandments be posted in public buildings. And of course, that's Moses, not Jesus. I haven't heard one of them demand that the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, be posted anywhere. Blessed are the merciful in a courtroom. Blessed are the peacemakers in the Pentagon. Give me a break, he says. Vonnegut was thinking of the Beatitudes that appear in Matthew, which are 8 in number, or 9, depending on how you choose to count. And they are the most popular ones in people's imaginations, the most familiar. In Luke, the Sermon on the Plain echoes the sermon of Jesus in Matthew, and it's hard to imagine that both sermons weren't one and the same, recorded by different scribes. Luke places the sermon in a less picturesque setting, and his account of it is much shorter, only about 30 verses, as opposed to Matthew's 100. Either Matthew had a better memory than Luke, or else he was given to embellishment. Or perhaps Luke just skipped over the parts he didn't find as interesting. The best biblical scholars agree that both sermons are literary devices, used to gather together the various sayings attributed to Jesus into a single historical event that probably never happened. In other words, neither the Sermon on the Mount nor the Sermon on the Plain were ever preached in the form in which we have received them, unlike my sermon today, which is painfully real, as you are here to attest to. If we can agree that both versions of the Beatitudes are poetry, we might also say that in recording them, Matthew was the romantic poet, while Luke was a realist. If Matthew emphasized love, then Luke focused more on justice. While Matthew's rendering is more spiritual in tone, Luke's is more material, more embodied, more earthy. Luke's Beatitudes are immediately relevant to socioeconomic circumstances, whereas Matthew's appear to reflect a later spiritualization of material disappointment, perhaps even a failed movement for change. As a consequence, Luke offers a more thorough ethic and better political manifesto than Matthew. His teaching compels us to do something here on earth and not just imagine it as some ideal state of being. Luke's version has only half as many Beatitudes as Matthew's, but he rounds them out with an equal number of woes. It was a good news, bad news sermon. Personally, I like Luke's approach, although I miss the 4 blessings of Matthew that Luke doesn't include. Blessings for the meek, the merciful, the pure of heart, and the peacemakers. In fact, the very Beatitudes that Kurt Vonnegut imagines would be valuable on the walls of a courthouse. As a side note, I've been told that in French, blessed are the meek is translated as happy are the debonair, which gives a whole new meaning to that one. Luke's blessings and woes are essentially 4 couplets when you arrange each blessing to fit with its countering woe. We cannot expect to be blessed until we have overcome the cause of our woe, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. Not only for our friends, but for our perceived enemies too. We will be redeemed together, or we will be lost together. Taken together, the blessings and the woes are a refutation of so-called Christian nationalism, which is neither Christian nor patriotic, but rather a justification for greed, bigotry, and cultural arrogance. When Luke says woe, he is addressing those who have turned Christianity into a mockery of the teachings of the very man they claim as its founder. Nothing could be farther from the teachings of Jesus than the fundamentalist theology and reactionary politics of the Christian right. Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. You cannot hoard your wealth and ignore the pleas of the impoverished and call yourself a follower of Jesus. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. But woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. You cannot ignore the hunger of those who long to be fed and claim to follow the one who reportedly fed the multitudes, both spiritually and materially. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. But woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. You cannot deport the alien, deny medical science and its cures, forego empathy, and profess to be one with the itinerant rabbi who healed the sick, however their health may have been restored. Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you. But woe to you when all speak well of you, for that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets. You cannot rely on your fame and reputation, especially when it is unearned, while you marginalize those who are different from you. Hate your neighbors. Speak ill of those your heart is too small to understand, and expect history to remember you as anything other than who you really were. I am quite uninterested in the theology of Jesus. I am quite uninterested in most of the theological pontifications of both the Bible and the church. But I am drawn to Jesus as a political economist, as an ethicist, as an imperfect man from 2 millennia ago who held out the promise and the possibility of a different kind of society. A society in which love prevailed not only for our neighbors, but even for our enemies. A society in which the hungry would be fed without people sitting back to ask whether or not they deserved it. A society in which everyone would have a home to go to, whether humble or great, where they could feel safe and secure. A society where decency would rule rather than wealth, where when we wept, we would weep together, and where we would not find joy until we brought joy to the entire community. Eleanor Roosevelt said that to her, religion has nothing to do with any specific creed or dogma. It means that belief and that faith in the human heart which makes us try to live our lives according to the highest standard which we are able to visualize. We must honestly try, she said, to put into practice some of the things which have always been considered too visionary to actually be tried in everyday life. In other words, she understood religion to be a constant, ongoing effort to overcome our woes by being blessings to one another. For it is you and I and our neighbors who are the unspoken Beatitudes in life. And we will either bring to this world its woe or its joy. We are the blessing. Please join in the closing hymn, number 304, A Promise Through the Ages Rings.